The story of the Soviet Union begins not with the creation of a state, but with the collapse of one. In 1917, the centuries-old Russian Empire fell apart under the pressure of war, famine, economic chaos, and revolution. As the Tsar abdicated and the provisional government struggled to hold power, the old imperial borders began to fracture. Finland declared independence. The Baltic provinces pushed toward autonomy. Ukraine formed its own government, and the Caucasus drifted into its own political experiments. By the time Lenin and the Bolsheviks seized control in October 1917, the empire they inherited was already dissolving before their eyes. The years that followed became a brutal contest to rebuild something from the ruins. Between 1918 and 1920, the map of the former empire changed constantly. Finland's independence became permanent. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, secured their borders through war and international recognition. Poland re-emerged as an independent country and pushed eastward, clashing with Bolshevik forces in a conflict that shaped the future borders of Eastern Europe. In the Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia each declared their own republics. Ukraine and Belarus wavered between independence and occupation, becoming battlegrounds in the chaos of civil war. By 1922, after years of fighting and millions of deaths, the Bolsheviks had reconquered most of the former imperial territory. The Red Army absorbed Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia into Soviet republics. Belarus and Ukraine were reshaped into socialist republics, tightly controlled from Moscow. Central Asia, which had seen its own revolts and autonomist movements, was reorganized step by step into a series of republics. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, each carved out through a mixture of political design and ethnic classification. On December 30th, 1922, these territories formally joined with the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic to create a new multinational state, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. What emerged was not a restored empire, but a federation built on the ruins of one. By the late 1930s, the USSR contained 11 major republics, stretching from Eastern Europe to the Pacific. Everything changed in 1939, when Europe descended into war again. Soviet diplomacy and military force dramatically altered the borders of the Union. After signing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Nazi Germany, the USSR occupied eastern Poland, pushing its frontier hundreds of kilometers westward. The Baltic states were forced into accepting Soviet troops, and by 1940, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were fully annexed into the Union. That same year, the USSR seized Bessarabia and northern Bukovina from Romania, expanding into the region that would later become Moldova. Finland resisted Soviet invasion in the Winter War, but ultimately ceded significant borderlands around Karelia, pushing the frontier closer to Helsinki. For a moment, the Soviet map reached its pre-war maximum. Then came the German invasion in 1941. The USSR lost control of these territories as the Eastern Front became the deadliest battleground of the Second World War. But by 1944, as the Red Army pushed westward, the Soviet Union not only regained all the lands it had lost, but expanded even further. After the war, the Soviet border settled into its longest-lasting configuration. The Baltic states remained part of the Union. Western Ukraine and Western Belarus, taken from Poland, were fully incorporated. Moldova took shape as the Moldavian SSR. The Karelian lands ceded by Finland stayed within the Russian Republic. The USSR stood at its territorial peak, controlling 1/6 of the land surface of the Earth. For the next 4 decades, the Soviet borders remained remarkably stable. Externally, the lines drawn after World War II stayed untouched. Internally, minor adjustments took place, the most notable being Crimea's transfer from the Russian Republic to the Ukrainian Republic in 1954, a symbolic gesture at the time, with enormous consequences decades later. Throughout the Cold War, the Soviet Union presented an image of a vast and unchanging union of republics, tightly connected through central planning, a single political system, and the reality of Moscow's authority. But beneath the surface, economic stagnation, national identities, and political dissatisfaction slowly grew. By the late 1980s, the forces holding the Union together began to crumble. Gorbachev's reforms opened space for political expression, and once that door opened, the desire for independence surged. The Baltic states moved first, declaring the illegality of their 1940 annexation and setting a course for full sovereignty. Armenia, Georgia, and Moldova followed with their own independence movements, driven by historical memory and rising nationalism. In Central Asia, republics that had long been seen as the most loyal began asserting their right to self-determination. Ukraine and Belarus, central pillars of the Union, declared that their laws were superior to Moscow's control. By 1991, the Soviet border, once one of the most stable on Earth, began dissolving almost overnight. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia regained independence. Georgia followed. Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Moldova broke away, each dealing with conflicts that would shape their futures. Ukraine declared independence after a national referendum, creating one of the most significant political shifts in modern European history. Belarus, Kazakhstan, and all the remaining Central Asian republics soon joined the wave. By December, only Russia remained as the successor state, and on December 26, 1991, the USSR formally ceased to exist. In less than 70 years, the Soviet Union had expanded, contracted, and finally fragmented into 15 independent countries. What began as an attempt to rebuild a fallen empire ended as one of the most dramatic state dissolutions in world history.